Hi, I'm Donna Kallner, and this is Lesson 3 of the New Age Looping Basics e-course. This video will introduce you to some different materials that you can use in your looping projects. But first, let's take a look at some of the ways our ancient ancestors might have used this technique. For example, where I live in the woods of the northern Great Lakes, in the United States, one of the longest and strongest fibers available to indigenous people would have been the inner bark of the basswood tree. In this example, you can see me starting from a round base using cordage that I twisted from basswood bark. Even though I'm not using a needle, I've still got thread moving in a path that travels in and out of the edge of the work and crosses itself to form a stitch that will not unravel. As each stitch is made, the entire length of the thread follows that path. In looping, since you draw the entire length through on each stitch, it's worked with relatively short threads. Now, this makes perfect sense because for thousands of years, people would simply spin or cord fiber as they worked, adding on length when a thread ran out. We live in a world inconceivable to our ancient ancestors. In many areas, there's at least one store open around the clock, 7 days a week, with a selection of yarns they would have thought completely magical. Many of us have stashes of fiber at home, boxes and bags of balls and skeins, yarns and thread, twine, string cord, that would have been immeasurable wealth in an earlier age. And while there are those who still harvest, process, spin, ply, and dye their own fibers, we don't have to do all that before beginning a project unless we want to. New Age looping marries the ancient tradition with contemporary fibers that come in long, continuous lengths. It doesn't make sense to pull a whole skein of yarn through on each stitch, so we end up cutting or breaking the threads into shorter, workable lengths. When a thread runs out, instead of spinning on more length, we'll use other methods for adding on. I'll show you some methods for adding on in the next video, but first let's take a look at some of the threads that you might have on hand and might want to use in a looping project. I don't generally start to teach looping technique with wool yarns because they're fuzzy and it's a little harder for students to see the structure of the stitch, but I love working with wool. Wool singles, plied wool, worsteds, wool mixed with other fibers like silk, anything that will felt, because that's a great way to add thread, which you'll see in the next video. There are lots of non-wool yarns as well, like this tacky mercerized cotton, which you'll see in the project later in this lesson. There are crochet cottons, all kinds of strings that you can use for looping. Hemp cord, which you'll see used in lesson 4. Strips of fabric are a great thread to use in a looping project. It's a great way to use up fabrics from your stash or to make something useful from old garments. If you're preparing yardage for looping strips, cut it on the bias or diagonal grain. Cutting the strips on the bias minimizes fraying while you work, but it will fray enough to give a nice soft chenille effect if you put the finished piece in the washing machine. You can even cut strips from old t-shirts to use as a thread for looping. The beauty of this material is there's no fraying. You can make a bag that you throw into the wash machine and it'll come out just as nice looking as the t-shirts you treat the same way. Whether you're using recycled t-shirts, strips of bias cut woven fabric, silk ribbon, clothesline, sewing thread, whatever you find that you want to try looping with, the biggest thing you need to keep in mind is have a wide assortment of tapestry needles available on hand, because you always want to work with a needle that has the smallest eye you can comfortably thread with your stitching element. Really, you can use anything as long as you can figure out a way to add thread that is secure and doesn't make you crazy. Really, any way you want to add thread that works is fine, but I'm a big fan of materials that let you add thread in a way that's easy. I like easy. So that's what we'll look at in the next video. I'll see you there.